Critical tasks are those we undertake where, if a failure were to occur, the outcome or severity could easily result in a significant injury or loss. When carrying out these critical tasks, it's essential we identify, manage and control all hazards and risks and focus on error traps and the error prevention tools to further mitigate risks. This enables tasks to be completed in a well-planned, safe and productive manner. Your supervisor will identify the activity as a critical task during the preparation and planning phase for the work. This is part of a mandatory process which must be followed, irrespective of the critical task to be undertaken. It's important you understand the process and your role within it, and this module is part of the Doosan Babcock Critical Task Training for working at height and on, near or over water. It will help reaffirm your personal awareness, accountability and ownership for these activities. Please take time to watch, listen and understand this module. It's important and it will be assessed. Working at height causes more fatalities than any other workplace activity and is second only to slips and trips in being the cause of major injuries. Working at height means any work activity where a fall could cause personal injury, even if it is at or below ground level, and that includes working near, on or over water. Working at height critical task activities are covered in the following operating procedure. Furthermore, a hierarchy of control must be adhered to. Avoid working at height and use existing safe places of work wherever possible. Provide work equipment to prevent falls. Mitigate the consequences of a fall. Ensure training and competence of everyone involved. Working at height becomes a critical task activity where, as a last resort, a task is being performed out with a safe working platform and/or the use of work restraint or fall arrest equipment has to be used. It also applies for access to or for work performed on a fragile roof or surface or near fragile roof lights or skylights. This essentially means any time a harness is being worn. You must always inspect your harness prior to use and ensure it fits properly with the thought process, "This harness could save my life today." If you are working on a mobile elevated work platform, from the anchor point, the lanyard length should be short enough to prevent a person reaching a position where they could fall. If you are working on an open platform, using a fixed lanyard back to an approved anchor point, the lanyard length should prevent a person reaching a position where they could fall. If you are using a fall arrest lanyard, make sure it is attached to a high anchor point. You may be working on a fragile roof, which may display a sign similar to this. However, if there is no sign, you must treat all roofs as fragile unless proven otherwise. If you are working near a fragile roof light, it may be blended into the roof profile like this example of a corrugated roof. Or it may be more easily recognizable, like this example of a raised roof light. In all these circumstances, the critical task process applies. There are absolutely no exceptions. In these instances, a thorough risk assessment must be carried out. Everyone involved in the task must be competent, trained and briefed, and the task must be properly planned and supervised to minimize the risk of injury. The risk assessment for critical task working at height activities requires the following as a minimum before the commencement of work. Location of the work and conditions. Access and egress at point of work, including first aid and medical facilities. Ease of rescue and evacuation. An emergency response plan. The distance and consequences of a fall. The duration and frequency of the activity. The risk of using various types of equipment, for example, guardrails, work platforms, nets, airbags, fall arrest equipment, or ladders. The use of equipment just in case is totally unacceptable and will not be tolerated. There are additional hazards and controls for working on, near or over water. It doesn't matter whether the water is tidal or not, at a quayside, a pond, floodwater, ice or mud. These critical task activities must be carried out with the same level of awareness and vigilance. The risk assessment process requires that appropriate certified and serviceable survival equipment is provided for everyone involved in the task. The emergency response plan must cover what to do should someone fall into the water. Everyone involved, including the crew of the rescue craft, must be adequately trained and drilled on the rescue and recovery process. The plan should also consider contacting the emergency services such as the local hospital, police, fire service, RNLI, Coast Guard and the Harbour Master. Prior to any critical task activity involving working at height, near, on or over water, a Take 5 must take place. No Take 5, no work. The supervisor will complete a pre-job checklist and everyone involved in the task must sign to confirm they have read, understood and agreed to the method statement and risk assessment. So let's look a little closer at the hierarchy of control. If working at height is unavoidable, exposed openings such as this must be avoided through the use of barriers, scaffolding or temporary work platforms. Users of fall arrest equipment such as harnesses and lanyards must be trained in their use. And it's important to consider anchorage points when using fall arrest equipment. These points must be capable of sustaining the forces should a fall occur. They must be fixed and unable to move in any direction and located such that they won't get damaged. And they must be located to reduce the risk of pendulum effect in the event of a fall which can lead to injury. This can be avoided by locating the anchorage point above the user and restricting work beyond 30 degrees of the anchorage point. If working on, near or over water, rescue and grab lines should be placed in strategic locations to allow a person to exit the water. Rescue boats should be of appropriate design with sufficient crew to allow people to be lifted from the water. Survival equipment should be thoroughly checked for damage and wear and tear prior to use. The wearer should check for twists on the jacket and tighten the life jacket such that it's comfortable to wear. You should be able to fit your fist between the buckle and chest, and finally, a crotch strap should be worn at all times. In the unlikely event that you should fall into the water, the jacket should inflate automatically, but if it does not, activate the manual cord. There is also an oral inflation valve available. Remain calm, float on your back and await rescue. Now let's look at an example from the workplace. Two HS&E officers engaged in specific and specialist out-of-hours active monitoring observed operatives emerging from an area that was not on the out-of-hours work scope. This was in the same area as on the previous night when the task was suspended due to inadequate work authorization procedures. The operatives were preparing to carry out heat treatment on a section of pipe both at grade and at a height of approximately 2.5 metres. Although the operatives had the correct work authorization, there were work at height issues which had not been resolved from the previous night. The platform the operatives were working from was inadequate, with potential for an unrestricted fall. The operatives had an understanding of how they would work at height. There was no company-owned work at height equipment, and they were planning to use a harness that had been left lying around by others. The operatives indicated they had been given some instruction on how to wear a harness, but when observed putting the harness on, it was clear their knowledge was not adequate. There was no direct supervision at the workface, and it was evident that remote supervision for this task was ineffective. The work at grade was allowed to continue, but work at height was suspended. Subsequent investigation highlighted the following points. The subcontractor HS&E team had carried out some work at height training on harnesses. Although there was a sign on the sheet which included the operatives, there was no confirmation of competence and understanding. The training was ineffective. There was a demonstration at the workface to explain working at height procedures, but there were no records to confirm the demonstration had taken place. There should have been control measures, including a lifeline which would run along the rear wall to allow operatives to hook a fixed lanyard to restrict access to the fall area. Neither lifeline nor fixed lanyards were in place. Ladders were to be used with a built-in platform for access to part of the task. These were at the worksite, but not used by the operatives. A scaffold barrier along the edge of the fall area could have been used to take away the need for personal fall protection measures. The correct critical task process was not followed, and a potential accident could have resulted in a serious injury. Working at height becomes a critical task activity where, as a last resort, a task needs to be carried out with a safe working platform, and/or work restraint or fall arrest equipment needs to be used. And finally, remember that a Take 5 can be called to reassess the risk at any time during the task. If other hazards are identified, stop the job and reassess. If things change, stop the job and reassess. If you're unsure, stop the job and reassess. Thanks for watching.